Hi, loves. So this is our Annotated Bibliographies mini lesson for research. And you guys, most of you are familiar with this already, so we're just going to go over it in this format. So what we know about a bibliography is that it is a list of sources that includes books, journals, websites, periodicals, anything that you use. Even if you use a label off of a cereal box, you have to be able to cite that source and explain how it is used for your research. It is also sometimes called references or works cited, depending on the style or format that you are using. For example, in this particular assignment, we call this an annotated bibliography, but when we put it with our research paper, we label it a works cited and we take away the annotations. But in this case, it's called a bibliography. We know the root word biblio has to do with books, but we also know that the way that we research has expanded a lot from just books. The third point, what we know about a bibliography is that it usually just includes the information about the source itself, like the author, the title, the publisher, the date that we downloaded or accessed. So we know what bibliographies are. We know MLA format. We know all of that. But now we need to think about why an annotation. So an annotation is a summary or evaluation of the source. And they're important for a number of reasons. They're important to learn about your topic. They're important to prepare you for your research projects because you're forced to read each source more carefully. Then you read more critically instead of just collecting information, which is something that we do when we just do reports. When we do a report, I did a report in 4th grade on the Monterey eel, and I just put a lot of facts about a Monterey eel, but I didn't think critically about those sources. The final one is by reading and responding to a variety of sources on a topic, you'll start to see what the issues are, what people are arguing about, and then you'll be able to develop your own point of view. So as we're, in this case, researching our question about taking a stand or making a change, we can see what kinds of stands other people are taking and see where we fit in that greater dialogue of research. So there's a couple of MLA formatting musts. The format of your citations is like a normal reference list, a normal works cited, but then we change it up a little bit. We use hanging indents instead of normal indents. The first line of the citation will start all the way to the left margin, and then the subsequent lines, every other line will be indented for spaces, so it'll just be hanging off of the first line. So it's almost like an inverted paragraph. They also need to be double spaced, not just within the citation, but actually between the entries. Do not add an extra line between the citations. They're also a continuation of the citation itself. So if you have your normal works cited entry, you just, right after you put the word print or right after you have the date accessed, you just continue with your citation, and we'll see an example of that in a second. And also, don't forget that it needs to be alphabetized. Like any other bibliography, you have to put them in alphabetical order. There is an exception. If you divide by primary and secondary source, they won't all be alphabetized, but within each section, they'll be alphabetized. And if you get longer and longer research papers, your professors eventually may ask you to do some different things, but for now, this is the basics. So here's the example. The spacing got a little messed up, so I apologize. It's supposed to be just double spaced. So this line right here indicates, like, if you can see, there's no indent on the first line. This is all the way in the left margin, whereas all other lines, all subsequent lines are indented, so it looks as though this whole entry is just hanging off this first line. And then up here, the annotation follows the citation immediately. So once I finish my citation, I immediately start talking about, and in this case, I identified my source right away. And now we're going to look at the different components of an annotation. So the first component is a summary. And to summarize, you consider, what are the main arguments? What are the author or authors saying about your topic? What is the point of their article? What's the purpose? What did they go into to prove? What topics are covered? And if someone asked what this article or book is about, what could you say to them just in informal language? Those are the kinds of things that go into a summary. And length will vary for different assignments, but a good rule of thumb, at least for the purposes of high school, would be like 3 to 5 sentences. The second part of an annotation is to identify. And to identify a source, you just say, who are the authors? Not just list their names, but think of where did they come from? With what organization are they affiliated? What are their credentials? Do they have a PhD? Have they been a writer for the New York Times? Or are they just, is it little Susie in her basement writing a cool article about why people should wear bicycle helmets? So between Susie and a PhD, a professor who's writing about the importance of helmets, you have to consider which one is a little bit more reliable, which goes into our next component, assessment or evaluating a source. So consider these questions. Is it useful to you? How does it compare with other sources in your bibliography? If you found one source that contradicted that source, then it's important to look at those contradictions and figure out which one's more reliable, which one uses better sources themselves, which one has maybe they're less bias, or we're looking for better studies that they did or more information. So it's really important to compare the sources within your bibliography. Also, is the information reliable? And how do you know that? And that's something that you can discuss in this section of your annotation. In addition, is this source biased or objective? This is probably one of the most important things to talk about in terms of our school-wide rubric. We have to look, is it an objective source? If it's biased, we have to acknowledge that bias and look for the weaknesses in that argument based on that bias. If someone brings with them an idea that without kind of researching both sides, it's really not as valid of a source as something else. And you can address that and kind of put it on a scale. Excuse me. But it's very important to address any potential bias in a source. And finally, what is the goal of this source? By thinking of the goal, if the goal is to persuade, you might be a little leery. If the goal is to inform, that's a little bit different. So think about our purpose, audience, and context that we talk about all the time. In short, does it pass the CRAAP test? Now, we have had a lot of experience with the CRAAP test, and I just took a little screenshot and put it in here. You guys have this in your research folder. But the CRAAP test just forces you and gives you a method to assess your source and evaluate your source. Is it relevant? Does it have authority to it? Is it accurate? Purpose? What is its purpose? And so these questions will really help you do that. Finally, to reflect on a source, you need to consider these questions, and this is particular to our project here. How does this source fit into your research? Was this source helpful to you? How does it help you shape your argument, or how did it add to a subtopic? How can you use this source in your research project? So if you are thinking about, in my case, I'm going to create little kits for teachers to spark imagination in the classrooms. So I have to think, what is this information, how is this information informing my research project, not just my research paper? And then finally, how has it changed maybe the way that you think about your topic? So the last thing I'd like you to do is take some time and just pause this at the end, and I want you to identify the 4 parts in this example entry. Where does this example entry have an identifying of the source, where it talks about the credentials? Where does it summarize 3 to 5 sentences about what this source is about? Where does it assess? Does it discuss reliability? Does it discuss bias? Does it compare to other sources in a greater annotated bibliography? And finally, does it reflect on how, or does this person reflect on how they're going to use it both in their research and in their project? So good luck, and make these awesome.